Hello and welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast that helps you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and this week on the podcast I'm going to be taking a look at some of my big calls and breakouts for season 2026, and I'm also going to have a bit of a look at the ADPs, the current average draft positions on Keeper Fantasy platform for startup keeper and dynasty leagues. But before I get to all that, I want to have a bit of a chat about the State of Origin that returned to our great game on the weekend and just give a couple of my thoughts on it. And I'll be honest, I haven't really gotten excited about State of Origin returning. It's kind of all felt a little bit gimmicky and I just haven't really got into it. But I must say, watching the game on Saturday night, it was exciting, fast, skillful, good footy, and it looked like all the players on the field were having a crack. So, yeah, I reckon it couldn't have gone any better. Obviously, injuries aside, but I think the AFL will be pretty happy with it, and we're probably going to see it again next year. Which, I think it's a good thing. Now, from a fantasy point of view, I think we were all watching it very closely, trying to take any info we could to sort of get an idea of what the fantasy season is going to look like when it comes to the way rucks score and the new rule changes that are in. But to be honest, it was fun to watch it, but it's really hard to take too much from it, data-wise because like the rucks scored really poorly for both sides, but then again, both sides played two top dog rucks and their time on ground was quite low. I mean, you look at Tristan Sherry, for example, he only played 53% time on ground. Tim English, I think, was in the 50s as well. So it was entertaining, but I don't think we can garner too much from it in a fantasy sense anyway. On the weekend, I was busy with more drafting. It's my favourite time of year, doing fresh drafts to start the year, and it's the best time of year because every side you draft and every time you look at your team, it just looks like a winner because it's all about optimism. No one's let you down yet. So on Saturday night, I had my keeper home league redraft in my league, which is called Finders Keepers. And I had picked 7 and amazingly got Dan Annable because, I don't know, I think everyone was kind of looking for guys that'll hit the ground running and score straight away. And I know I was keen on that, a guy like Sharp or I really need a defender, so Lindsay from the Eagles, because I really want to contend this year and I've got enough guys like Annable. In saying that, I've got an absolute jet with pick 7, so I'm not going to complain. And then on Sunday night, I did a single season mock draft for the Draft Doctors with a bunch of other content creators. And that was done on the fantasy platform, which I haven't used in years. Since Keeper came out, I've just always used that. And it was pretty good. I was pretty happy with it. I think they've done a good job on it. And it was a fun draft. I had pick 7 as well and took Connor Rosey with my first pick. So good fun over the weekend. Lots of drafting, a bit of real footy to watch, albeit State of Origin. And now, as we approach the next few weeks leading into the season, we'll have practice matches and, it's going to be good. We're going to start to finally get some real data and real information on what roles the players are going to have, and we can start to forecast season 2026 with a little bit more accuracy. Before I get started with my big calls and breakouts, I do want to have a bit of a look at the ADPs on the Keeper platform, Keeper Fantasy platform at the minute. So ADPs, that stands for Average Draft Pick. It's a really good metric that you can use to get a feel for how others are valuing players in their drafts before you do your own. And it's so good on Keeper that you can see it right there, and it's actually split depending on what type of league you're in. So if you're in a single season draft league, the ADPs will reflect those types only, and then obviously Keeper and Dynasty will reflect those ones. So having a look at the Keeper and Dynasty League ADPs, And I did this a few days ago, so some of the numbers may slightly change. And I found 5 names that I think are too high and 5 names that I think are too low. So I'll start with the too high. Josh Dunkley is currently at an ADP of 26. That makes him the 15th mid. And I just feel like it's a little bit early for a guy who's approaching 29-30. He's been absolutely flying. I know that, but I feel like this is a season he may drop a little bit, and might be more on him in my big calls a bit later. Ed Richards comes in at an ADP of 35.8. That makes him the 21st midfielder off the board. And look, I think it's only slightly too early. The only reason I think it's early for Richards is he's 26. He's had a few good years now, but I do feel like he's probably just at what he is. I can't see him going past his high 90s average and blasting out a 105, 106. I hope he does. I've got him in both my keepers, but I don't know. I just feel like it's a little bit early to jump on a guy who, for those playing captains, I probably wouldn't be too comfortable making him captain. The next one I've got is young Jasper Fletcher for Brisbane. He's going at an ADP of 43.8. That makes him the 10th defender off the board, and I just feel like we're getting a little bit excited with his season last year, and it was fantastic. Don't get me wrong, he averaged 83. He's so young. He's so good with the ball in his hand. The only thing I'm just a little bit concerned, and why I probably wouldn't go that early if I was doing a new league now, is I just wonder with the amount of guys they play in that role. You've obviously got Zorko, who will probably just stay there till he retires, if he ever retires. You got Kadeem Coleman coming back from long-term injury, although it looks like he might start a bit forward. You've got Darcy Wilmot, who's doing a really good job back there. I just know someone like Fletcher, as good as he is at half-back, he's also really, really really potent for them playing on the wing, and that's where he was to start last year. So if he does fall back to a wing spot and in time loses that defender status, I just don't know if he's quite that early for me. The next one I have is Bailey Dale, who's coming in at an ADP of 56.5, and he's the 11th defender off the board. He's had a great 4 years since he's gone to the halfback line, and he's been excellent. The only thing with him though is he's like 29. I think he's getting old. Not old, but he's getting older. And I've always found with Dale, or sort of thought with him, that his average doesn't always tell the full story. And the reason for that is he has these massive ceiling games throughout the year. So he always kind of ends up with an average around the 90s. But if you look at last year, for example, average 92, which is excellent, had that huge game where he had 49 touches. So that was a 150 he scored. But he actually had 7 games where he scored under 70. And those sorts of scores just kill you. If you're investing that early in a guy like that and you get 7 games under 70, I don't know. I feel like he's always done it. Doesn't mean he's terrible. It's just at 56 ADP, I just feel like it's a bit early. And the last one I'll look at is Isaac Heaney, and his ADP is 32.4. He's the 18th mid off the board there, and I'm not sure why we're rating him so highly. I mean, he's been an excellent fantasy player, but with mid-only status, I just don't know if he's that valuable. Now, perhaps the ADP's been swung a little bit because some people are playing with the extra keeper fantasy DPPs in which he has forward status. So that's probably skewing it slightly. But if I'm playing with him as a mid-only, he's had one big year a couple of years ago, and then he faded a bit last year playing in the same role. So yeah, awesome player to have. I'd definitely draft him. I just wouldn't be going that early on him. Okay, so who are the players I think are a little too low for what I'd rate them as in the ADPs? And the first one is Dan Houston, who has an ADP of 141, and that makes him the 40th defender that you're going to pick. And I know how terrible he was last year, his first year as a Pie, but he's 28, and I don't know, I just don't think he'll put up another year like that again. I think he's going to find his rhythm, find his place a bit more in his second year in the black and white, and be a lot better and closer to the Port Adelaide version. And even if he's not, 141's still too late for him. I'd be stoked to grab him at that point. The next guy is Caleb Windsor from Melbourne, and his ADP is 182.5. He's got defender mid status, so that makes him the 53rd defender off the board. Now, he's coming into his third season, and there was a lot of hype when he first came into the league. I remember when he was first drafted, I heard he was a similar type to Errol Goulden. Got my attention. And for his first couple of years, on paper he hasn't really done much. He's just averaged in the 50s. But he's played, and late last year he was trialled in the midfield on the ball. I mean, I still see him as more of that rangy sort of halfback or wing type guy. But from all reports, he's playing in the middle in the preseason, and I think he's going to have a big year. And I'm surprised people have sort of faded him that far. I guess, on paper, you see the average and you think, well, it's not happening for him. But we're so quick to give up on players. This is his third year. And I think if you start up a new keeper and you get him at that range, you're going to be very happy come the end of the year and beyond. Next one is Nick Bryan, the Essendon ruck, whose ADP is 209 at the moment. And that makes him the 19th ruck off the board. And I know what you're probably thinking. He's coming off an ACL, and he's not going to be playing until rounds 5 at earliest. But I mean, if you think of the average league, 10-team, 12-team, that means people aren't grabbing a backup ruck like Bryan until super late, which makes sense. But there's about 7 or 8 guys that are going to get picked before him. And I think this guy is going to have the keys to that ruck line at Essendon. You got Todd Goldstein retired, Sam Draper off to Brisbane. They've got Vicentini, who's super young, and I think Lockie Blackiston's going to sort of play the role until Nick Bryan's fit again. I'm just really excited about Bryan. He's got some really good numbers when he was rucking solo last year. He's been around for a while. Yes, the knee injury is going to push him back and set him back, but I feel like he's a sort of agile type that's going to benefit from these new rule changes. And yeah, I was just surprised to see him so far down. Next one is Connor Buderick, ADP of 244.2. That makes him the 63rd forward off the board. Now, he's coming off an average of 49. He's never really had a big season. It's just been all potential with this guy. But with forward status and coming across to the Bulldogs this year in what sounds like a very nice rebounding half-back role, yeah, I was very surprised to see him that far down. And I guess it's interesting, when we draft, we do like to draft for potential, but sometimes just the proven guys have to go ahead. And yeah, it is staggering to think in that forward line this year that is so light on, that on average people are drafting 62 forwards before him in a startup. Interesting. And then the last one, this one was understandable but still staggering. So Jack Lukosius, who was such a big name when he was drafted in that super draft with the likes of Rankin and Rozee and Butters, and had an okay career at Gold Coast, had one really good fantasy year when he played off half back, and now he's at Port Adelaide where he's going to be, just a permanent forward. But I was quite optimistic on him last year, playing as that high half forward that gets up the ground and links the play. But he had injuries. He just never got going. So did I say what he was? Yeah, 323.3 is his ADP, making him the 98th forward. I think he will, do a lot better as long as he's fit. I think he plays and he averages 70 at worst. But I think his upside is really big. So that could be a real steal super late in your startup, keeper or dynasty league draft. Of course, it is only mid-Feb and there are plenty of drafts still to take place. But yeah, that's just what I thought. Caught my eye just looking across the current ADPs as they stand. Now, on to my big calls. You could call it hot takes, wild predictions, whatever you want to call it. These are the things that have sort of been popping up in my head over the preseason that I know are probably not popular opinions. And in the end, I just called them my big calls. So, yeah. I've got 5 thoughts that I've tried to articulate and provide some evidence that if they happen, I'll probably come and revisit this and say, hey, my big calls are pretty good. And if not, well, I'll just move on and forget I ever did it. But here's my 5 big calls for 2026. And the first one, Josh Dunkley is going to drop off this year. And what I mean by drop off is not average. Let's say not average 100. Let's say he will average 99 this year. Now, on paper, he's flying. He's averaging 108, 107, 104 in his 3 years as a Lion. And if you look at his form in the final series, he was unbelievable for Brisbane and his fantasy scores were huge. He's only 29. There's no real obvious indication he's going to drop off. But last season, there was a 5-week run in the middle of the season where he averaged 85. And in and around that time, it was quite noticeable that he was playing a run-with role, a tagging role, where his job wasn't to find the footy, but to stop someone else. And it stood out, particularly when they played Adelaide. He did a job on Jordan Dawson and kept him to a very, very low possession tally and was very effective. Now, that 5-week period of 85 was pretty poor, but the rest of the year was huge. And that's because of his elite tackling. His tackle numbers were at a career high last season. He averaged 8 tackles a game. So he's not really accumulating the footy a great amount, but he's laying a heap of tackles. So why will that drop off? I think that this season they will go back to using him in that role because it was effective. And there is, I don't have to tell you, there are a lot of young Brisbane midfielders coming through. They seem to draft them every year. You've got Levi Ashcroft and Dan Annable as the very, very new young guys. Zach Bailey got a look through the middle late last year. And I reckon they'll try and give him more of that this year to just keep him happy as he approaches free agency. Then you've got Cam Rayner who can roll through there. You've got Jared Berry. I know he's on a wing, but he can roll through there. Lachie Neale's still going. And I just think that they're going to start to not rely on Dunkley as much. And that'll start this year. And as a result, he's going to drop, even if it's just a couple tackles a game. And that's how I see it. So that's why I thought his ADP was way too high. And that's why I think Josh Dunkley, who is absolutely flying, is going to just average 99 this year. All right, big call number 2 is Tom De Koning going to St Kilda is not a bad thing for Rowan Marshall's fantasy career. Now, it's bad news for Marshall in terms of him being the best ruckman at St Kilda and the best fantasy ruckman in the game. But with De Koning getting across, I think this season Rowan Marshall will get forward status and become a top 6 forward for the season. De Koning will be the man. He's come across on big money and he's younger and everything we're hearing pre-season is he will be the main man, sharing with Marshall, but Marshall will play more forward. Now, we've seen this before with Rowan Marshall. If you cast your minds back to seasons 2020, 2021 and 2022, he was the backup ruck to Paddy Ryder and played forward and had the forward status. And in those 3 years, he averaged, and with 2020, I'm going to use the old 1.25 multiplier, he averaged 96, 90 and 91 in those 3 years. So I see no reason why he can't average in the 90s this year in the same role. And with that average in the 90s, I think that will put him quite easily as a top 6 forward. So then I guess, how does it help him? Well, it doesn't help him, sorry. It just doesn't hurt him as much as you'd think. And yes, the perfect scenario for Marshall owners is he got traded to Geelong and he's the number 1 ruck. But I think as he gets older, if you can spend your time investing and finding the next big ruck for your team, you could have Marshall as a forward for the next 4 or 5 years, and I think that's a better result than if he stayed ruck only. Big call number 3. Will Brodie will play over 20 games for Port Adelaide in the AFL side this season. And this is a big call. Where we sit right now, it's a big call, but I'm going with it. I have a feeling and I like it. So he was brought in, it was a nothing trade. They gave a bag of peanuts for him because Fremantle weren't using him. Now, he was brought in as insurance. If any of the big Port midfielders were to be injured, they've got this ready-made guy to come in. However, he's had a very impressive pre-season from everything I've heard. And, you've got Horn Francis coming into the year under a bit of a cloud, just with that foot. It was a foot injury. So he might play a bit more forward, is what I'm saying. And if you'll recall, when Will Brodie had his best year at the level, the only year he played, I think, over 20 games, and he averaged like 94, 95, was for Freo when Josh Carr was the midfield coach at the time. He's now Port Adelaide's senior coach, so I like that connection. And as we stand, Brodie's going to play rounds 1 and 2. He's going to cover Ollie Wines, who's suspended. The big question is, what happens after round 2 when Wines is back from suspension? Can Brodie play well enough that he's undroppable? Can Brodie show he has more tricks up his sleeve to just being that pure inside mid? Now, he had forward status back in the day, so he's obviously played as a half-forward flank as well as midfield. He's got to find a way to show them that he is super important as a midfielder and as maybe a forward guy who can swap. And Wines doesn't have to play on ball. He plays wing, and anyway, it's not just about Brodie versus Wines, of course, but you just need Brodie to hold his spot for round 3, and then I wouldn't be that staggered if he finally found his way at the level at his 3rd club and played the majority of games. Big call number 4. Zach Merritt will have his lowest CBA percentage since records were kept. So 2020 was the first year that the CBA percentages were kept, and he was at 56% in that year. He was at 63% last year, which is already quite low, and I think he's going to go even lower and be around the 50%, 55% mark. Why do I think that? It's got nothing to do with him wanting to get a trade to Hawthorn, giving up the captaincy and that whole unpleasant ordeal. I don't think Essendon are going to say, oh, well, we'll pay you back for trying to leave us. You're not going to be a midfielder anymore. I don't think clubs are that petty. You'd certainly hope not. No, I think he's fine. I think the relationships are fine and he's going to have a great season. But they actually tried to move him out of the centre bounces last year. and we saw it at times, but they just couldn't stick with it because half their bloody list was injured, and they needed him to play the role that he's so good at. Looking at 2026, we've got Darcy Parish is back. Jai Caldwell is, the main mid for him now. Great season last year. Sam Durham offers a bit in the forward line, but I really like him on the ball. Braden Fiorini's come across. Yes, he'll probably be mostly on a wing, but can play inside and is quite good at it. Even Archie Roberts, who exploded off the half-back line, there's talk of him training and maybe having a bit of midfield time this year. You've got young Dyson Sharp, who's just been drafted, but is that good? He's probably going to roll straight in. You've even got poor old Will Setterfield, who, was looking great last year. Then he copped that injury. Then he got delisted. Then they picked him up again. And I think he's injured again. But if he's fit, I think they like him at the coalface, and there's no other spot on the field for him. And even Elijah Sardis, is he still going to be a chance? Anyway, won't talk about him. But my point is, Bombers are going to be trying to roll through as much of these guys, and Zach Merritt is, he's 30 and he has a lot to offer. I could see him playing half back, commanding that back six, a bit of a surety on the ball, and even playing forward of the ball and helping that forward line. He's such a great player. So I think that's my call. He's going to have the lowest centre bounce attendance of his career, but he'll still have a decent year, and who knows, maybe DPP could be coming his way this season, which would be pretty cool. Big call number 5, the last one I've got for you, and it's Liam Reedy will be Carlton's number 1 ruckman by the end of the year. So the Carlton ruck line is interesting. They obviously said goodbye to Tom de Koning, and I thought that they would bring in someone pretty big to cover it. Instead, they brought in Liam Reedy, the largely unknown guy who was backup to the backup at Freo, only played 3 games in his 4 or 5 years or whatever he was on the list there. So he's come across, and then they've got Mark Pitnet, who's, he's a solid citizen. I don't think he's one of the best rucks in the game. I don't think he'd be in the top group, but he has a go and he has a crack. But the opportunity is there for Reedy to overtake him. And I'll confess, I don't know a great deal about Reedy and his ruck craft, but I know, here's a couple of things I know. He averaged 117 in his last 10 games for Peel Thunder in the Waffle last year. And the other thing I know is his inability to get a spot at the top level is not an indication of how poor a ruckman he is. He's been stuck behind Sean Darcy and Luke Jackson at Fremantle for a very long time. And there's another player who was stuck behind those two, and that's Lloyd Meek. And he's doing pretty well at Hawthorn these days. So I'm not saying that that's the exact same type of player, Reedy and Meek. I just know that the last time a Freo ruck left, he ended up being pretty good. And I don't rate Pitnet as being someone really hard to chase down for the number 1 spot. And I may have picked up Reedy in both my keepers with that forward status, so I guess I'm just hoping. But I'm sticking with it. Reedy, he'll be the man. Now, some of you will be sitting back listening to my 5 big calls and maybe thinking some of them make sense or some of them are outright crazy. But that is the beautiful thing about this time of year. So far, absolutely no one is wrong. And that's what I love about pre-season. But let me know what you think. Is there any merit to what I'm saying? Or have I just completely missed the bar on these 5 big calls that I've put out? Let me know. Give me some feedback. You can find me on X at FindKeepAFL, the Finders Keepers X page. Give us some feedback. And if you thought those 5 were big calls, wait till you hear the big call that was sent in by a listener, which I'll read out at the end of the pod, it's different, but it's what I love about it. Big calls. All right, let's have a look at my breakouts. So I found 6 names, and if I'm honest, I could have probably found dozens, yeah? Like, there's so many guys that have the potential to break out in season 2026. I don't know why I landed on these 6 names. I guess I feel really strongly about some of them. Some of them are players I've been tracking and hoping for a breakout for years. So again, I'm probably just willing them on. But either way, I think these 6 guys, if you own them heading into this season, I think you've got real cause to have a lot of expectation that this could be the year. And the first one is Joel Freya for the Bulldogs. In his 3rd season this year, and he has that beautiful forward mid DPP status. Now, he had tongues wagging early last year with some big scores to start. In fact, when he came in halfway through 2024, he looked really good off halfback. And then at the start of last year, we saw a similar role, but then we saw him in the midfield, and he had some big games. And with his big frame, some were calling him Bontempelli 2.0, which might be a tad premature, but I think there was something in that. He was moved around position-wise throughout the year, but in his 5 games where he had over 30% CBAs, he averaged 81, which is 10 points up on his season average of 71. He ended up playing, I think, a bit of forward flank, which gave him his forward status, but didn't help his scoring, and his scoring did dry up a little bit as the year went on. This is a guy in his 2nd year, by the way. So this year, in the 3rd year, I really think the Dogs, as much as they're probably thinking they're going to challenge for a flag, and they may well do, I think they're still going to look to move the likes of Liberatore and Treloar a little bit out of the way of the centre and give guys like Freya more of a look. They've also got Matt Kennedy in there. He had a great first season. Obviously, Bont, Ed Richards has been fantastic there. And I just think the time is right to start to transition Libber and Treloar out. I mean, Treloar missed most of last year anyway, but you know what I mean. Start to move those old guys out. Get those younger guys in. Riley Sanders needs to look in there as well. Another guy who might need to have a bit of a look in there because he's probably looking around at his options, and he's a Tassie boy, so maybe he's just hanging on for that. Anyway, my point is, I think Freya gets more midfield time this year, and I can see a predicted average for him at 86. That's what I've landed on, and that's a breakout with forward status that you would be very happy with. The next guy is Connor McDonald for the Hawks, and this will be his 5th season. His best average was 78, playing high half forward in 2024. And he went backwards in 25, dropped his average by, about 12 points maybe, something like that. But playing the same role. It just sort of seems like the better the Hawks get, the more spread out their fantasy scoring is. I mean, they're not a big fantasy scoring side. They don't have guys who go huge. So for McDonald, I think, even without a role change, we know he can get back to 78. But I think that role change is coming. The midfield at Hawthorn is, pretty hot topic on a lot of people, for a lot of people this pre-season. They let James Worpel go in the off-season. They didn't get Zach Merritt, even though that, they certainly tried. And Paul Will-Day is injured again. So the midfield needs something in there. And Connor McDonald I'm pretty sure he was a midfield jet, fantasy jet in his junior days. And I think this is the year he gets the opportunity. He's been training with the midfield. There's been lots of talk about him in the midfield. And then Sam Mitchell had the whole fantasy world reeling the other day. And I reckon he's just trolling us, to be honest, because what did he say? He's like, oh yeah, he's been training midfield, but he's basically still just going to be playing forward. And that got blown up and spread on socials. And people who played the salary games were saying, oh, we can't start him now because he's not playing midfield. Of course he is. Mitchell's just, I don't know what he's doing. because he then came out and said days later, oh no, he'll be playing plenty of midfield. Anyway, he's going to be playing more midfield, and he's going to be better than what he's done so far. He's a great player, and I always thought of him as more of a Dylan Moore 2.0, but the more I hear about his history in the midfield as a junior, the more I see it, and I think he's up for a big year. And the best thing about him is I don't think it'll be enough midfield time that he loses forward status for 2027, and I think this year he can hit an 88 average. Lachie Cowan for Carlton is the next guy I'm predicting big things for in 2026. This will be his 4th season, and his best averaging season was last year with 63, but if you remove the games where he had less than 50% time on ground, that average does shoot up to 74. And then if you look at Cowan's finish to the year, and I really like looking at the last, half a dozen to a dozen games of a season, if a player builds scoring momentum, it does often transfer to the next year as a breakout. And he finished last season averaging 80 in his last 8 games. Nick Newman's returning from that long-term injury, and Ollie Hollands looked pretty good in that role. And still got Adam Sard running around. I'm just trying to think who else is there. I just don't think it matters. I think this guy Cowan, he's shown to me that he's got the skills to be the main man in that back six and really set up the play. I notice he doesn't really take kick-ins, which is fine. I mean, if you don't take a kick-in, you're more of a chance of getting a mark and a kick, which is worth more than a kick-in. But I wonder if that role will change as he gets a bit more seniority. Anyway, I think it's a big year coming up for him. I'm very excited. I wish I had him in the keeper leagues I'm in, and I reckon he's going to average 87. All right, player number 4, second last player. I think I might have said I had 6 players earlier. I only have 5. Sorry about that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. 4th player, second last. Angus Sheldrick, young Sydney midfielder, and someone I've been doting over for years because I feel like he can be an absolute fantasy gun. This will be his 5th season. His best average was a 62, which he achieved last year and 2023. And he's had an interesting journey because he played a game, in 2022. And then 2023, he played a few games, or plenty of games, with very, very low time on ground, probably sub games. But his points per minute were incredible. And I remember being so excited about him for the next year. And then he didn't get a game for the Swannies at senior level for all of 2024. And then last year he got his go. And how many games he played? He played a bunch. But the thing that was really cool was we finally saw him playing midfield and full games, not just sub games here or there. Now, for the 4 games last season where he had over 50% centre bounce attendances, he averaged 81. And that's probably with fairly low time on ground in those games as well. He's had very low time on ground across his career, obviously being the sub a lot, but even when he's not. But as I said, he's got a very high points per minute and always has. If you look at his whole career, he's played 18 career games with over 50% time on ground, and he's averaging 77, which is pretty impressive for a guy who isn't always, playing inside mid. So, the big if, but I'm confident on it. If he plays a full season as a full-time mid, I think this kid's going to be really, really good at the fantasy game, and I just hope he gets his chance. I'm optimistic he will. I mean, Callum Mills is back, but he's going to be a backman. He's a half-back defender at the minute. That may change as the year goes on. Isaac Heaney's in the midfield, I know that, but he can go forward. And, James Rowbottom's there, but he went forward a little bit late last year, and you got Chad Warner as well. I just think the time's right for them to hand it over to Sheldrick and give him that chance. But they're kind of hard to read, the Swans, because they didn't play finals last year, and I thought maybe they'd be down for a few years. Then they drafted Charlie Curnow, and all of a sudden they're flag favourites, which is probably fair if you consider that Errol Goulden was injured last year, Callum Mills was injured last year, Logan McDonald was injured last year, I think Papley wasn't right, and now you add Curnow. But I just think they're going to give Sheldrick his go, and playing full-time mid, I reckon he's going to average 91. And on to the last... Oh, no, I do have 6. Oh, I'm sorry. This is what happens when you don't read your own notes properly. I do have 6. So there's one more after this guy. And this is Judd McVie at Fremantle. 4th season in the comp after 3 years at Melbourne. And, of course, it's his first season at the Dockers. Now, he hasn't averaged over 59 before, but he has shown pretty good potential and good scoring ability when he's played in a rebounding role. And he had a go at that. I think early last year we saw bits and pieces. I remember his name and thinking, "Ooh, who's this guy? He could be a potential guy that no one's talking about." But then the role changed and the scores dried right up. They made him play lockdown because he's very good at that too. And Melbourne had guys like Jake Bowie, Trent Rivers, Christian Salem had a big year. They're kind of covered for that role back there. And I think they clearly they rated McVie more as a lockdown than anything else. But he has found a trade back to his home state, to the Dockers. And a big part of the pitch, the sell, was that they would give him a more freed up rebounding role. And that has since been said many times by himself and others in this pre-season. And it is looking very much like he and Jordan Clark could become kick-to-kick buddies if Freo's ball movement stagnates. Now, Freo fans will hope that doesn't happen, but fantasy Freo fans, fantasy Freo owners will hope that it does, because we remember what they did a couple of years ago when Jordan Clark and Luke Ryan played kick-to-kick. It was a +6s for days. So I think McVie will have to lock down at times, but overall I think his role is going to be quite freewheeling, and I'm predicting a real jump for him. He's going to average 78. And my last breakout candidate for season 2026 is Josh Weddle for Hawthorn. This is his 4th season, and his best average was last year with a 70. He's a really interesting player, Weddle. He's a really good size, and he can kind of play any position on the ground. And that's an asset, but it also can be a bit of a hindrance, especially when we want consistency for our players to score big fantasy scores. Now, last year, I feel like he was beginning to put it together. He was on an 11-game stretch averaging 77 in that period when injury hit in round 16. And he was playing a variety of roles, predominantly as that interceptor in the back line, but also can go forward and provide a target, sort of roaming up the wing. He's great to watch, but need him to find a spot and stay there. The heat map that he has suggests he is an everywhere man, but if that can settle a little bit, and I think as well, this is why I'm really excited. With the midfield at Hawthorn, there's lots of spots up for grab, and I talked about it with McDonald. I think, and I know that he's had bits and pieces in the midfield this pre-season, and I think we're going to start to see him play that halfback intercept, run up the wing, get forward if he needs, but also have bursts through the middle and at stoppages where he can use his big frame, extract the footy, extra touches, extra tackles, and that's just going to help him. He's a really good player, and I really hope this is his year. Even last year, so he was on that run, got injured in round 16 and was basically ruled out for the season with that back injury. He returned earlier than they thought, and he actually played in the finals. And his first game back, he scored, I think, an 86, 88 in that final. I think it was against the Giants. Yeah, I think he's going to be a star. Will it be this year? Maybe. But I think a breakout's coming, and I'm predicting Weddle will average 87. Will I be right? Well, time will tell, and again, I'll look like a genius. If all 6 of those guys do what I say, they will. But I'm pretty confident that, I guess if it doesn't happen this year for him, maybe it's next year. And that's just a nice little out I'll just put in there in case I get it completely wrong. So that's it. That's it for my big calls, my breakout contenders, and my thoughts on the current ADPs as well, which I went through at the start. So a bit of a different episode this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. A little bit of predicting, forecasting, and again, just talking about players who, if you own them, you can get excited because, like I said, even if it doesn't happen, these are guys that have the potential, and I can't wait to see how it all unfolds. Now, before we do wrap up, I put the call out on X and said, give me your best hot takes for season 2026, and didn't get much back. But I did get a cracker from @FPL_Aussie, and this is what came my way. Jack Ross will be a top 5 forward this season, averaging 90 plus. And I love it because I reckon a lot of people hearing that would say, no way, you're kidding. Not a chance. I actually think there's a chance. I'm a big Jack Ross fan. The thing that hurts him is the amount of brilliant young kids, midfielders coming through for the Tigers, and the fact that they're not contending. They're going to be down the bottom and they're going to just play these kids. And the fact that Ross is a very good winger. He gets up and down the ground really well. But he has a midfielder's game in him. And if the cards fell that way and he played predominantly inside mid, I think he absolutely could get to 90 plus. He's, 25 now? He's quite a senior guy all of a sudden at the Tigers. And, I don't think it will happen. I think there's others that go there and he sticks to his wing. But I think he's going to have a good year. He's going to be very handy with that forward status again. 90 plus? Probably not, but it's a really cool take. I like it. So thanks FPL_Aussie for sending that one through. That'll do it, I think, for this week on Finders Keepers. Make sure, if you are enjoying the podcast, you enjoy this episode, make sure you've liked and subscribed wherever you're listening. It's really important that those numbers continue to tick upwards for Finders Keepers. And if you really like it, give us a 5-star review. That'd be really appreciated too. Don't forget as well to find the page on X @FindKeepAFL. Give the page a like. Stay up to date and informed on what's happening with the podcast. And stay tuned because there's still another few more weeks of pre-season before we get into it. And we've now got some practice matches that are going to be happening across the next few weeks that'll give us a little bit of info, a little bit of role, idea around roles. And I'll be here every week to try and unpack it and make sense of it so we have an idea of what's to be expected from opening round and then rounds 1 and onwards. So stay tuned, plenty more good stuff coming up on Finders Keepers. And in the meantime, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers, and until next time, keep on keeping on.